Okay, I think we're nearly done, so we'll get started and get through on to the main thing. So, welcome everyone to what's the second general meeting this year of the DT. There'll be one more, be the AGM in early December. As all but probably the least observant of you will notice, we've got a film camera here. So this is, again, we're filming this. Hopefully within a week or two, it should be hosted up onto WebJam. So if there's anything you want to catch up on, have a look at, feel free, or point others to it for those that miss stuff. Also, though, so I don't do, we're also live posting onto WebJam as well. So we're trying that again to see how that works. So again, there'll be a record of the meeting on there. Quickly, from apologies, Dave Grounds isn't able to make it from the DTB, and Tom Brown, Secretary, isn't able to make it today either. He's off on holiday. I think everyone else will be here, although one or two of them will be slightly late in Jane's case, but slightly later in Sean's case, maybe here shortly. Oh, and yeah, so and apologies from the FCB side from Ivor. Hopefully we've got enough people here to be able to answer all your questions we go through. So that's the apologies. So the only bit of formal business on the agenda tonight is approval of the minutes from the SGM on the 5th of June. Hopefully everyone got the copy of that through with either the email or on the doc drive. If so, has anyone got any comments about those from the last meeting? If not, can I please ask for show of hands for the approval of the minutes as a record of the last meeting? Thank you. Anyone against or abstaining? No. Excellent. Right, we'll take that as read. So next on the agenda is basically an update on the stadium. Here, hardly the most exciting, but I say a world exclusive on transfer deadline day for you. Not on the player front, but what I want to reach out to you is a press release that's going out tonight, and it says, to the effect of, Dons to sign Chief Operating Officer. AFC Wimbledon are seeking to appoint a Chief Operating Officer to help the executive team manage the increased workload resulting from the new stadium project and the club's continuing success on and off the field. The new recruit will report to Chief Executive Erik Samuelson and will take over responsibility for some aspects of the club's day-to-day running from him, as well as planning for the Dons' long-awaited move to a new home in Plough Lane in the club's Spilshere home of Merton. The search for a suitable candidate will be led by the board of the Dons Trust, which oversees AFC Wimbledon on behalf of 3,500 shareholders. This is an interesting one. I'm now quoting myself being quoted. The workload tackled daily by our existing management team has grown massively in the years since we became a professional club. Our ambitious plans for the future mean that operational capacity, skills and experience will be needed, said Matthew Breach, Chair of the Trust. We will be looking nationwide to find someone suitably qualified, and a top priority will be the need for them to really understand the culture of a fans-owned club. Applicants have until the 22nd of September to submit their details. It is hoped that the COO will begin work by January. And there's a link there to how prospective candidates can gain details about the job. Really, I did that as an opening to the sort of stadium update and question and answer session. It's one of the things that's been obvious, I think, to many people is just the amount of work that's going on in both running the club and having a massive construction project going on at the same time. So this is basically trying to come up with the best way of freeing up some of Erik's time so he can concentrate on delivering the stadium. We have someone who's looking after running the club and trying to make it as commercially profitable as can be, and getting it set up right to move into the new stadium. So that's the idea behind this, and it's basically strengthening the current management team. So thought it'd be good to announce that to you here tonight. It will be going out shortly. But on the back of that, any questions about that or anything to do with the new stadium? And Erik and I, or any of the others, as appropriate, will try and answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Without this seeming like Groundhog Day, the section 106, any closer to being signed?
This probably will sound like Groundhog Day, but I'll pass over to Erik for the absolute latest.
Looking the wrong way, aren't I? Evening, everybody. Yeah, the Section 106. It just briefly, it comprises 5 documents and 5 appendices. So although Section 106 is only 1 letter and 3 numbers, there's a hell of a lot behind it. Most of the 5 major documents are complete now. They comprise the Section 106 itself, which basically is what the council lay out as an agreement between us, Merton and Galliard, saying what's going to happen around the stadium, what improvements need to be made to local roads, etc. There's these 78 planning conditions, which are things like, for example, what hours we can open the stadium, the hours that the retail store that will front onto Plough Lane can open, all sorts of stuff like that. Sound control, noise control, that sort of thing. There's the development agreement, that's the agreement between us and Galliard, which basically says how they're going to pay us the money and what happens if they can't pay us the money, what controls there are to make sure that they do, and those are things like you can't finish letting all the flats be occupied until you paid the money across, so they've got a real incentive to pay the money. There's the transfer document. That's a boring sounding but really quite exciting document that deals with the transfer of the land to us on which we're going to build our stadium. And then there's a phasing plan, which is basically when everything's going to be built, because if we don't get it right, we'll be trying to build something in a place where Galliard are already occupying the space. And then behind that there's all sorts of other appendices. So that's a really huge amount of work. As I've been told many times with these things as they go along, they accelerate towards the end when the lawyers really get into gear, I think is how I'd put it. And last week we had some long debates and discussions. Over the weekend they continued, the lawyers speaking lawyer to lawyer. And yesterday, what day is it, Thursday? No, Tuesday, I spent an hour or so on the phone with my counterpart at Galliard, basically with a list of things that the lawyers say only he and I, on behalf of the club and the trust, can agree. And we agreed them all. Quite a lot of arm wrestling, but no shouting. And we now think that there's, so far as we can tell, nothing of any significance to be agreed at that level. There's still all sorts of tweaking and tossing and turning to be done. There are also things that would be agreed between us and the council and between Galliard and the council. And there's a meeting next Wednesday, starting at 10 and scheduled to run till 4 if necessary, to try and batten it all down and then leave the lawyers to argue about the dots of the I's and the crosses of the T's. So next Wednesday we won't be signing it, but we should leave the room thinking we know when we're going to. That's certainly my hope, and it's certainly my ambition that we will sign this document in September. Long answer, short question.
Question, John? So it'll be a short meeting if there's only one question of the stadium.
I'm not sure this has been said before. Do we have the land freehold or leasehold?
No, don't you?
The last I heard it was a freehold, but we'll check again because it has bounced around a couple of times.
That's the intention, it'll be freehold. Merton didn't want to hold the land, funnily enough, we thought they would. I'm not dancing, I'm just trying to get this thorough around. They didn't want to hold the freehold, they didn't want the possibility that it all revert to them, they actually want it in our hands, and so that suits us. In practical terms, I think Galliard have a part share in a company called GRA Acquisitions. It will own the land, it will acquire the land from NAMA, or acquire the right to it from NAMA, the Irish Toxic Asset Bank. They will then pass it to Merton, I'm not sure if gives the right word, and Merton will pass it to us. That will all happen pretty well on the same day. And that's the day, incidentally, when effectively this stadium is sold, the completion of this stadium. So yeah, freehold. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric. Tim? Is that George?
Evening, I think this one's for Eric again. And it's a two-part question. Firstly, do we formally need to go before the council again? I know they've given planning permission, but do they need to sign off the Section 106 between themselves and the planning committee? And secondly, what's the timescale after the agreement is concluded?
The last time I spoke to, not the leader of the council, but the leader of the team we're dealing with on the council, a guy called James McGinley, he said there is nothing in, we've obviously tweaked a few things in the agreement, including in the planning conditions, but there's nothing in there that he believes is not within, there's a word for it, I can't think of the right word, but I'll call it delegated rights, but I think there's another word they use. Anyway, there's nothing that they can't deal with that way, and they can do it they can effectively do that. So no, there doesn't need to be another formal planning committee. Or that's what he tells me. The timescale, let's just say, because this is nice and tidy, that we sign it on the 30th of September. I don't really want to make much noise about this, but there is then one last possibility of a challenge to us, something called a judicial review, which anybody can make. So we don't really talk about it in public because we don't want to put the idea into any crazy's head. There's 6 weeks in which people can do that. Anybody can do that, but please don't. If they do, you can only challenge the decision that's been made on 2 grounds. One is that no one in their right mind would have come to the decision they did to grant us planning permission. That's one basis you can challenge it. The other one is that the process that's been gone through is flawed in some fundamental way. And you wouldn't believe how careful, I've watched Merton close up, how careful they've been to make sure this is an absolutely rigorous process. On top of being a rigorous process, we've been called in by the Mayor of London, we've had an attempt to call in by the Secretary of State, we've had Historic England breathing all over the site. Really, you couldn't get more rigorous. But somebody could still complain, at which point a judge would have to say there is or is not a case to look at. In fact, they'd probably have to look at the case and say what they want to do. And that could cost us, you've got 6 weeks for someone to do that, and then after that it could cost us whatever time the judge decides to take. So let's hope that doesn't happen, because we've had enough of these things. Let's say it doesn't, then we probably, Galliard, leading on this, won't do anything until 6 weeks after 30th September, which is the 11th of November. They will then start demolishing the site, clearing the site. We won't be doing anything other than, well, on the site we won't be doing anything, I'll come back to that. And the estimates of the time to clear the site vary from 6 to 8 months. There's known to be asbestos in the Greyhound Stadium, and how long that takes to clear is probably the biggest issue. But they will clear the site and then come across a word I've not really used before in this context, they will remediate it. That basically means they will clear the top 1.5 meters, I think it is, of soil, tarmac, whatever, and hand it over to us in that state. Once it's been confirmed that it's been remediated to the standards being laid down. The standard being, it is a standard on which a stadium could be built. Seems a fair definition. Once they've done that, we can start building. So if you add, let's say 7 months, it's between 6 and 8, on to mid-November, that's mid-June, no, mid-May, somewhere around there anyway. Well, that's when we will start building, and we're still assured by our contractors that we can get it built in time to open in the 2019-20 season. In the background, while all that's going on, we will be designing the fine detail of the stadium itself. And Matt will probably want to say something about talking to fans about what might go into the stadium. And getting into the final end point where the contractors can give us a detailed fixed price for building the stadium. That's been going on, and then that'll be finished around about the end of the year, and then we'll be getting people all lined up, waiting with engines revving at the door for the moment the land is handed over to us. And away we go. Actually, I don't think the design will be finished by the end of the year, more like February, but anyway.
Thanks, Eric. Just actually, I'll cover the point that Eric raised there briefly. So if you want to know a bit more about it, we could go through it in more detail later. But fundamentally, the board members have tried to pick up everything that they could think of that people might be interested in consulting over or being talked over around the new stadium design. Trawled some of the guest books, some of the other things where people had suggestions of what they're interested in. We've come up with basically an extremely long list of everything that could be consulted around. What we're trying to do now is to stick that into a sensible, logical order to highlight the things that really can be discussed rather than are things that are pretty fundamental. Because of the way the stadium is, there is no way it could be any different. But there are quite a lot of things that we should be able to talk around, and we're trying to put that in a timeline so we can do selective engagements at each of those points, so we don't just bombard people with hundreds of questions at one point. We actually ask specific points at specific points in that process, so we can try and put that through. So that's likely to start fairly soon with a few sort of very top level things, just to get a feel for what members think about. For instance, should the stadium be a money-making machine to get us the best team we possibly can, versus is it a community hub and we don't care how far we ever progress in football, or what flavour between those two extremes do you lie? So things like that give a whole steer about the type of thing we try and do. That's what we really need to get some of those sort of top level things first before into nitty-gritty detail. So you'll start seeing that sort of thing coming out relatively soon. I think now Colin was next.
Evening, guys. On the potential challenge, I mean, I think, you know, worst case scenario, if somebody makes a challenge. My understanding is that there's no cost to them making the challenge, but then if the judge takes it on and they lose and we win, then it could potentially be a huge cost. Is that correct? Can you clarify that?
There's a relatively trivial cost to making a challenge. I think, I don't think it's nothing, but it's not something that would be enough to put off a lot of people. A lot of people would feel comfortably able to afford it, perhaps a better way of putting it. After that, when it goes through to a judge, I don't honestly know. It doesn't matter because it will be thrown out. The thing is to get it thrown out as fast as possible. And it will be. So I don't know that people will necessarily be put up by the cost. If they want to be spiteful or difficult, then they will be.
You just spoke about consulting members. Do you actually mean Don's Trust members, or will it be a wider consultation?
We have some questions may be asked of the wider fan base. Some questions are very much down to it's the direction of the club and members of the people who have a voice in the direction of the club. So it might vary depending on exactly what the question is. But in terms of, for instance, the strategy thing I've talked about, that is a member's question, most definitely. So, but the same, it depends exactly what we're asking as to whose views you really need. Any more questions? Rob?
It's a question for Erik. Looking forward to 2019, we're in the new stadium, cash flow works out how we imagine, budget works out how we imagine. When do you think we might move on to phase 2, and when might we have a finished stadium? No pressure, you know, get your crystal ball out and have a look.
The honest answer is I don't know, because do you invest on the biggest stadium, or do you invest in the team in order to make it more successful, to get into higher levels, to make it easy? First of all, to give a bit of context, the TV money that comes from the Football League is not everything we get from them, so this is not entirely fair, but the TV money is split 80% for the Championship, 12% for League 1 and 8% for League 2. So you get 6 2/3 more in the Championship than you do in League 2. Therefore, although you would be tempted to spend most of it on players, because it would still be along the low spenders, you might want to set some of that money aside, or at least be satisfied that the business model will allow you to fund extra extensions to the stadium. That's how I personally think it ought to happen, at least in the Championship. I think we ought to get there first and then spend some of the money that comes our way and leverage into building an improved stadium. The 20,000, I really don't know. I mean, who knows where football's going. What we've done is we've, the current expression is future-proofed it, so we can't be strangled to death like the old plough lane was, if we are as successful as we'd like to be.
Another one, Erik. On the basis of who knows where football will be, there seems to have been quite significant movement in the potential for safe standing. I know that Shrewsbury have got the okay to test it out with their ground. West Brom have made noises about putting it in a corner of their ground, and if it happens in the Premier League, then the ramifications probably aren't lost on a lot of people in this room.
No, I've talked before, but I'm sure some of you, I never assume people hang on my every word. I didn't remember half the things I say. But at the moment, if we were to, at the moment we have £750,000 worth of grants on this place, which gradually expire over a 10-year period, but we're nowhere near that 10-year point, sadly. So if we move to Plough Lane, we have to pay them back, or move to an all-seater stadium, at which point, in principle, the Football Stadium Improvement Fund have said we can take the grants with us, in other words, not pay them back. We also still have about £200,000 worth of grants we've never claimed. So that's £950,000 I either have to pay out or won't be able to bring in. And if we don't build an all-seater stadium under current rules, that's the cost before we even think about the different cost of putting a terrace in. I don't think I should decide whether we do that or not. I have my own opinion, but that's almost irrelevant. The members should decide. I also think it's for the Trust Board to decide how to do this, but my personal view is a sort of menu of options should be put in front of the fans as to, you know, this is some money we've got, where should we spend it, and here's some options. What I'm aiming to do is, we're close enough now, I think, hence the recruitment of the Chief Operating Officer, we're close enough now for me to go back to the Football Stadium Improvement Fund and say, let's just reconfirm where we are with this money, that we don't have to pay it back. Commit in principle at the moment to an all-seater stadium, but make it clear to them that if the rules change between now and the date when we need to decide about a terrace, which is quite some distance down the line, it's not the moment we start building, it's quite some distance after that, probably 6, 7, 8, 9 months after that, so got a bit longer, then we will be coming back saying it is okay to take the grant still, isn't it, because we want standing. That's the intention. Or you'll have voted that we want standing and we'll suffer the loss or suffer the risk of the loss and build it. The other thing I'd say is people assume that a terrace is cheaper than seats, but I don't think that's going to be the case if we were to do that. That's not my expertise speaking, that's from speaking to the quantity surveyors. The reason is that the South Stand, which is the one that we see as being for the home fans, behind the goal, and a couple of the other stands are mainly relocatable seats. They look fine, they look good, but that's a posh word for temporary. There's an awful lot of those available on the market because of the Olympics and other things. There's hardly anything in the way of terracing available, and it's quite likely we'd have to put in something much more permanent behind the goal to put a terrace in, and that would cost more. We will know that cost when we come back to members to ask their opinions, and we won't be doing it blind. But don't assume it's cheaper. It's more likely, as I'm currently told, to cost more.
Neil would be interested, I expect, is what sort of attitude are we taking towards the pitch?
We're going to have one. There's a decision to be made, and we haven't made it, about the quality pitch to put in. We could, if and when we come to expand the stadium, one of the things we've planned for is at the north end, which is the end, if you like, that's onto Riverside Road, or the end nearest Earlsfield Station. If your geography is not brilliant, that's good enough for me. Is being built in such a way that we can actually take out the middle bit and bring cranes into the stadium, because there will be no room outside the stadium for us to use cranes to build the inside. We're not yet entirely certain that we can do that without wrecking the pitch. So we need to think quite hard about, can we get them in without wrecking the pitch? If we can't, then I would build a slightly less good pitch than I would otherwise. Then it comes down to, well, Deso pitches, or the equivalent of them, there's some competing pitches now, are somewhere between £750,000 and £1 million, and good quality pitches, but aren't the best. And Deso, the ones that have the nylon stitching underneath that brings it all together, are probably 2/3 of that cost. Where do we want to spend the money? What we will have is a pitch at least as good as we've got here now, and probably better. And that's, for now, that'll be good enough for Neil, I think. And it'll be international size, capable of taking international games. So a dome size bigger than the one we've got here.
Each meeting, the timeline seems to slip a little bit on the stadium. The builders are now promising us they can actually build this in 14 months, essentially.
Yeah,
That's
less than that actually they
Less than
say,
that.
but that's what's in the timescale.
Okay.
The reason is that effectively, because of what I just said, and this makes it sound a lot worse than it really is, but just to make it sound stark, we're only really building the West Stand. The rest of it is relocatable and a lot easier and simpler to build. The major construction work is on the West Stand, the one with hospitality in the seats, the equivalent of the full strength stand. And that is not as massive a job as building an entire stadium fully with all the rakers and all the other stuff. So when we went out to tender, we were quite taken aback and tried not to smile when the particular one who happened to win it, and it's not the reason they won it, said, we don't need this long to build it. So hopefully they'll prove that. And if we start to run out of time, what we can do is we can, I think there's a word, might be concatenate, but anyway, bring together there's the building of the stadium, and then there's the fitting out, whether it be the TV screens internally or the catering kitchen units, you can, and the pitch. You can bring that back so the two overlap. It costs a bit more, it's less efficient, but if you're running out of time, you just bring that forward, and that will save you a month or two more as well. So we remain confident we'll be fine, but you're right, every time I stand up and talk, the dates move back, because it's a construction project, and that's apparently how they work.
Are you expecting a big response to the shares?
So they what, sorry?
Are you expecting a big response to the shares, community shares, when you bring them out? Are you hoping?
There's a question about community shares. We talked some time ago about community shares, and the reason for doing that was to issue shares to help pay for the stadium or some things we wanted, and issue them in the Don's Trust, because that would be a particularly tax efficient way for people to invest in the stadium. The government have changed the rules since we first talked about that, so it's probably not the most efficient way to do it now. But we're still exploring ways of raising funds through what's generically known as crowdfunding, which means lots of individuals paying in. The majority of the cost of the stadium has been covered by the Galliard contribution, and that's underwritten by a bond, which means they won't, but if they were to go under, we still get the money. Another chunk, significant chunk, is the money from this place. The third chunk is a finance loan, and then what we aim to do is go out, well, what we're going to do, and again there's some consultation to be done on this, is say to the contractors, look, we can afford all the stadium on that money alone. We can afford to build the stadium and finish it, and a little bit spare in our back pocket. Don't want to be telling us too much, otherwise the price might leak up, but we've got a little bit spare. Therefore, if we were to do some crowdfunding, would you want to spend £1 million, we'll put a terrace in for you, say? Because if we can't, then I think that's much more effective way of raising money. If we raise £1 million, we can put a terrace in. If we raise, and I'm making these numbers up, they're probably wildly wrong, if we call it £1 million, we can extend the bar, so instead of holding 650 people, it'll hold 950 people, or break down into separate rooms. Or we can build a further end onto the West Stand, or we can put a permanent roof on, although that's incredibly expensive. But these are things we might do. What we're going to do is ask the contractors to say, it's approximately this for plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, and then we'll come to you and say, these are the things we might do, this is how much money we need to raise, which should we go for? And you end up deciding. As long as we really believe that we can raise the sort of money you're telling us we need.
Okay, any more questions on the stadium?
Ray. Thank you, Ray Layden. Just going on the cost of the contract for the contractor to carry out the work. I assume that have they got design and contract responsibilities? And secondly, it's notorious for building contracts to go over the budget. I mean, I'm sure you've got budget controls involved, but a lot of it hinges with how good the partnership is with the contractor these days. You take the cheapest price, the contractor is bound to be looking for every extra going. Have you got a relationship with the contractor where you're as confident as you can be that they will deliver on time and within budget or final price? Thank you.
When we started the process of going out to tender, I was sitting in a room just before we did the first interview with the contractors who were coming in, and Derek Wilson, who you won't know, he's a Burnley fan who still hasn't got over 1975. Lovely man who's designed the stadium said, Eric, what you need to be thinking about when you meet these people is when the project starts to go wrong, who can you sit in a room with and come to a constructive way of dealing with all these problems and make it build out? Because that's absolutely fundamental. I thought that was a really, really useful thing to say. And another thought I had is this, is one of the reasons I think this club is so successful is the people everywhere around the room, the people who built it, the people who support it, the people who volunteer, everybody. And therefore the relationship, as you say, I agree, and as I'm saying, I agree 100%, the relationship is fundamental. The two contractors who got into the final straight were almost identical in price. The differences in some of the subsets of the work, but the total price at the end was near as damn it the same. And we chose Andrew Scott because the people felt much more like a cultural fit. We felt, it wasn't my decision, they understood us better, understood our culture better, and were more akin to our culture than the other company, excellent as it is. So I'm convinced we can work with them. As for the controls, yes, we will have a fixed price when we finish the next phase of the design, which we will then try and hold them to, and it will leak because it always does. But what we're going to do is keep it down to a small percentage and stop ourselves saying, wouldn't it be great if actually we've suddenly thought of this and do that, because that's where the costs rocket and where even the best contractors will take you for a bit of a ride. I'm confident. I'm not supremely confident, but I'm confident. We'll be fine. We can manage it.
Thank you. Thanks. How much impact and influence do you think Galliard will have on the contractor, considering they're a huge house builder, full stop?
Well, there's two contractors. They got their own and we got ours. We invited them if they'd like to tender, and they, in my view, very wisely said no, they don't build stadiums, and that's what we've been told. They point to somebody who builds stadiums. For the whole site to work well, we're going to have to be good neighbours. If we've been involved in this sort of project, I think good neighbour clauses tend to abound within the deals. Let me choose these words carefully. I was told before we started this, beware of developers. I have found them to be absolutely straight, which has been such a pleasant surprise, because that's not what I would want. Not this particular company, but just developers. As long as the key people stay involved and stay close to it, I think we'll work well with them. And yes, we'll have fights, and yes, the two contractors will fall out over access and other stuff, but a lot of that is actually written into the development agreement. That's another part of it, and the management and construction plan and the phasing plan through the subsets. To the extent that we can specify what will happen and when we have, and where we can't, we've said we just have to behave properly, and I think they will.
Yeah, I've got a question for you. This is all very exciting, and as Don's Trust members, will you sort of have a regular site visit once things start to get in motion, that you could say, you know, that on a certain night or certain day we could go in and just have a quick look around? I think it's, you know, it's all part of the project, and we'd like to see the development of it.
I don't know. I've already agreed with Galliard that we'll have a webcam or whatever you call it. We haven't agreed quite where we're going to mount it, but there's going to be one. There's been some talk of having a drone, which might be what you think you're listening to at the moment. Whether or not that would actually be allowed, given the hypersensitivity of the substation next door to the stadium. As we walked the site, our project manager, Andrew Williams, and I walked the site, and we were talking about cleaning the windows of the stadium and abseiling down from the top in order to do it. You're not doing that. You're not coming anywhere near our land. So they may not be like that very much. As for site visits, I don't know. I really don't know. I think we should communicate as much as we possibly can, show you live pictures of what's going on, where it is possible. Yes, let's take people in, but how practical that is. I've never built a stadium before. I really have no idea. Done? No? Go on, Rob. Encore.
Thinking about our relationship with the local community around the stadium, obviously we had a few people who objected initially, but most people who live near there are fairly ambivalent or happy to see us develop there. What sort of relationship and communication are we looking to have with them from now and throughout the build to keep them on the side and let them know what's happening and stuff like that, to keep them happy with us being there and build a relationship with them?
There's part of the deal, the development agreement, which is full of all sorts of quaint stuff, is that we will appoint a PLO, which sounds rather ominous, but it's a public liaison officer who will work with the Galliard public liaison officer, and it's their practice to issue, I think it's a monthly newsletter to local businesses and surrounding places. But that's about the whole site, and that's probably really about, sorry about the traffic mess, this is about to happen, this is now cleared, all that sort of stuff, this is how far we have to go to build it. So we also need to do a communications campaign, and that will be starting in the next couple of weeks. The communications group that David Lloyd, who is not here tonight, chairs, are going to meet and get together and talk about the things we need to do. I'm very keen to keep that away from marketing. For me, marketing is when you say, we know how many boxes are going to be or how many suites, but actually the Dons are coming home. How are we going to pass that message? We've agreed with Galliard we're going to have 2 hoardings, that's all they'll give us on the site itself, 6 metres square I think they are. One on Plough Lane, one on either Riverside or Somerstown. But can we have flags and bunting from lampposts? I don't know, what can we do? We're also talking to local people, so we've invited, and they've accepted but not set a date yet, the MP on the other side of the road, Rosanna Alan Khan, who is the Shadow Sports Minister, helpfully, coming back to safe standing, but also the MP for Tooting, and my MP, by chance, is going to come down, and we've also got a couple of councillors from Wandsworth coming down, and we will be magnanimous about the way they were in the past, because we want it to work. We're also talking to the councillors in the ward, and have talked to councillors in the ward just opposite, I think it's Earlsfield Ward, one of whom is a season ticket holder here. So we're making sure we get them on board. Stephen Hammond, the Wimbledon MP, is coming to a game soon. So we're getting those people on board, and Ivor tonight is a reason for not being here. He's gone to a Wandsworth networking business meeting, same sort of stuff. So there's lots of individual strands to it which need to be brought together, but it's being thought about.